I'm going to tell you about my work with a group called Mungiki in Kenya. And this is the work, it's through the Center for Human Rights and Policy Studies, which is a research center which I had in Kenya. But my work with this particular group, Mungiki, is older than the center, so I'm going to start by telling you the story of how I came to work with this particular group. The group is called Mungiki, and Mungiki is a Kikuyu word, and Kikuyu is one of the groups in Kenya, actually the largest ethnic group in Kenya. And Mungiki in Kikuyu means masses, meaning a crowd of people. Mungiki is a vigilante group or a gang or a militia, depending on what you want to call it within the Kenyan context. It's probably the best known, it's certainly the best known gang or vigilante group in Kenya. It's been associated with widespread acts of violence, fights with the taxi owners, small business people. They run rackets, protection rackets, where the taxi people have to pay them a specific amount of money so that they can run their taxis. If you are a small business owner, if you are a shopkeeper, you have to pay a certain amount for protection. If you own rental houses, you have to pay them some amount of money for protection. And over the years, they have diversified from one type of business to the other. They were mostly doing this kind of running these rackets in urban areas, but in the last few years they have diversified and spread out to rural areas. Now Mungiki is important because it is the one group that has engaged the Kenyan security forces in ongoing confrontations for a number of years. And these confrontations go back over a decade ago. In fact, the first time the Kenyan public hand of Mungiki was in the mid-1990s, when they would be arrested and jailed, and some of them would be tortured by the security forces. I met them the first time in late 1990s. Then I was working in a human rights organization, and they came in as clients and as victims of human rights violations. These were young men who had been arrested, brutally tortured, some had their hands amputated, and so we picked up their cases as victims of human rights violations. Over the years, I've followed and tried to do research and find out exactly what explains their actions and their ability to mobilize in very large numbers. We tried to make several interventions with the security forces from a human rights perspective to tell them, you need to stop torturing these young men, you need to stop killing them. And the answers we often received from the security forces is, so what do you want us to do with these young people? We know they are criminals, we know they are killing people, we know they are beheading people, which is part of how they manage to keep this control over the various neighborhoods by, staging these spectacular attacks on people who don't cooperate. So, in a sense, the security forces, the police, that is, were caught in a difficult situation where they thought that the only way to respond to Mungiki, the Mungiki violence, was to either put them in prison or kill them or torture them in the hope that they'll stop doing what they were doing. So that has been the response of the Kenyan government, and particularly around 2006 and 2007, there was an intense period of confrontation between the Kenyan police and the Mungiki. They arrested most of their members, put them in prison, including the chairman. They also killed quite a number of those they could, and had most of the leaders on the run. They also rounded up them in thousands. In mid-2007, we probably had about 3,000 members of Mungiki in custody, either awaiting trial, mostly awaiting trial. This didn't seem to work, however, because my own research showed that the period of most intense imprisonment of Mungiki members coincided with the period of highest numbers of recruitment into the Mungiki. So it seemed that the police actions to clamp down on Mungiki by arresting or killing them ended up with the reverse results. They ended up recruiting more members. and so this led me to the question of, to the conclusion that we need to come up with better solutions to actually respond to to take to security officials or government officials on how to respond beyond the police, the prison and incarceration model. In the last 1 year, I noticed something very interesting, and that is there had been a decrease in the confrontations between the police and Mungiki, and also a decrease between the police, the Mungiki and the taxi owners. You did not hear of the spectacular confrontations, the beheadings and the fights. Yet the government had just passed the Prevention of Organized Crimes Act, which basically stated that anyone who was engaged in activities similar to what Mungiki was doing would be charged under the Organized Crimes Act. They could be jailed even up to life, and some would even face the death penalty in the cases where someone was killed in the process. So the government was continuing with these very repressive and punitive legal approaches to dealing with Mungiki, but yet in the last 1 year we noticed a decrease in the confrontations between Mungiki and the taxi owners. And that led us to an investigation as to exactly what was happening. And what I found in my research was that the government had, in the last 1 year, started a scheme through the Ministry of Cooperatives where young people could form themselves into savings and credit associations. And using these savings and credit associations, they could borrow some money from the cooperative banks and the microcredit lending facilities. And members of Mungiki had actually done that, and they had managed to buy themselves, organize themselves into savings and credit associations and buy taxis. So they were running the taxis, and therefore that's why now they were not fighting with the taxi owners, because they themselves are now become taxis. And that led me to thinking then, therefore here what we have is a possible model that we can take to the police and other government agencies and tell them, now here we have a model where you can make an intervention without having to arrest them or kill them. And we had discussions with the people from the cooperative societies who are very enthusiastic in expanding their operations to reach more of the vigilante groups or the gangs that are involved. But also we have had discussions with banks and private sector associations, so that they can bring these young people who are regarded members of gangs into the business arena, so that instead of thinking of what they do as purely criminal and therefore something that only needs to be regulated through a criminal law sanctions, now we are able to, we can go to them and tell them, here is an example, you can actually use a business rules to regulate them. And this coincides with an attempt by government to regulate the taxi business in Kenya. So for you to own a taxi now, you must belong to a certain, you must belong to an association. So you can, as an individual, you cannot be licensed. And using these associations, the government has some better control over the operations of the taxi business. And therefore, it works for the government to actually regulate better the operations of the taxis through by negotiating with these associations. And so for the people, for the police officers who are now fighting with Mungiki, because of the rackets they are running against taxis, this works very well. They don't have now to actually go out there and fight with them. It also helps us address or demonstrate to the government that actually their model of imprisoning them has not worked. Because when we looked at the prison statistics, for instance, in Kenya, we found that by 2010, Kenya had pursued a very aggressive policy of imprisonment of anyone who is associated with this kind of gangs. And so by 2010, we had 50,000 people awaiting trial or who are going through the criminal justice system. Now, Kenya is a country of that 8 million. When you compare that with a country like Nigeria, which has, more than twice the population, and yet Nigeria in the same period had less than 40,000 prisoners, what you found in absolute numbers that Kenya was very much pursuing aggressively pursuing an imprisonment approach that was not yielding fruits with regard to the lowering of the crime rates. We found very good support from the prison service. Remarkably, the prison service was very clear that this approach is not working. And the meetings that we held between the prison service and the police and other agencies working around issues of crime, the prison service were very clear that what was happening is that the society was forcing them to deal with difficult problems of youth who had dropped out of schools or unemployed and were getting into gangs, and they were forcing the prison services to be the ones that deals with this problem at the tail end. So very interesting response from the prison service that they were very clear that this is not where to make the intervention, that we know that imprisonment is not working, and they were very good allies in terms of demonstrating that this is not the right approach. We also got very good response from the provincial administration. And the provincial administration here, we mean the district officers, district commissioners, and provincial commissioners. These are the individuals who are like, they are like provincial governors, although they are appointed, not elected. They stated that on hindsight, they now realize that they made a big mistake when they worked with the police to aggressively go after Mungiki members, arresting them and jailing them. Because what happened is that the movement or the group went underground, and there are no way of knowing what was happening within the group. Within this period, they were cracking down on them. When they went underground, they started recruiting young children in schools, in primary schools, in high schools. And by the time the provincial administration realized that this is the wrong approach, they had already, particularly in one of the provinces, they had recruited very large numbers of young people. But now the provincial administration came back and said, this is not the right approach. Instead, we want to go out and speak to them and work with those agencies or organizations or individuals they can trust. And here, the religious organizations became a very important avenue of reaching out to these young people, particularly the Christian organizations. They organized themselves, went out to work to provide a safe environment where they could talk to the young people and also link them up with options of microcredit or places where they could get some skills to actually get a job or set themselves up in a business. We had also discovered that in 2006, 2007, which coincided with this large-scale confrontation between Mungiki and the police, it coincided with a period where the city authorities in Nairobi carried out an aggressive campaign of ridding the city of hawkers, peddlers, people who are doing petty hawking. So in the name of keeping the city clean and safe, they drove out large numbers of young people who are involved in petty hawking, petty trading. Now, the question that was never asked is what happened to these young people when they were driven out of the city central business district. Nobody posed the question, what happened to them? Now, what we realized when we were doing the research is that those young people who had been driven out of business from the central business district and actually moved to peri-urban areas, some to neighboring districts, and they had become members of these gangs, and they had recruited more young people. So unwittingly, in the name of actually making the city more safer, what the government had done is actually to drive more young people into the hands of this particular group. So again, we were then able to go to bring together city authorities and other people working, around questions of security in the city, and tell them that if you're thinking of clearing the city or moving certain petty traders from the central business district, you have to think of the security consequences of that action of making the city safer for business, because the experience and the data we have is that what you did in this instance in 2006, 2007 ended up actually driving more of these young people to the members of Mungiki. Also, it's very important also to note that part of what makes this group unique is also that it has very close links with the politics. They attempt to influence politics. Some of them have tried to run for elective office. But the approach of the government has often been, whenever they have tried to run for post in any political party, they will not be cleared to run as candidates. And when they formed their own party, the party was actually banned by the government without even being allowed to actually go through the process of us to demonstrate that they adhere to the rules. Now, our argument was that if you want to make these young people better citizens, give them the opportunities to mobilize, because what was their strength? Their strength was to ability to mobilize thousands of young people to become members of the group, and also to come up with these very interesting business opportunities for them to make money. So if they want to organize politically, what you need to do is not to forbid them from organizing politically, but to tell them, fine, you can become members of a political party, or you can form your own party, but you have to follow the rules as laid down by the law. So in that way, you regulate their behavior using what is existing, rather than criminalize their intention to become members of political parties or to become business owners. So in other words, our argument is we don't have to use the criminal law sanctions to intervene where they are running what are seen as rackets, as business rackets. Because remember again, these young people, particularly in some of the businesses they are running in slums of Nairobi, they are feeling a vacuum, a security vacuum. In slums, they run small security operations where they provide security to the neighborhood. These are slums where the police don't appear. You don't have any formal private business security agencies providing security to the poor people. So they become the providers of security in these areas. So they are feeling a genuine vacuum that exists in these particular areas. And in fact, a World Bank study that was done in 2010 in one of the slums in Nairobi found that the residents trusted this group more than the police to provide security. So whereas there was a criminal aspect to the activities, it is true also they enjoy a certain legitimacy, or people feel they provide a certain important service to them. So the argument then here was to the authorities that you don't have to criminalize them, although the activities might not be 100% above board, when they are using their skills and intelligence and creativity to provide a certain business service that is needed in the urban slums. So what you could do is that you encourage them to formalize their activities, to adhere to certain rules, whereas even as they are providing the security services in the urban slums, so that you don't drive them out of business. So again, it's trying to look for approaches that don't necessarily lead to arrests, incarceration. And from a human rights perspective, which is where we started the story, this works very well because you avoid instances where the police go out to shoot these young people in the name of killing criminals, which was what they did in 2007. In a period of 3 months, they killed about 500 of them. You end up decongesting prisons. You don't have mass arrests and incarcerations or prosecutions under very punitive laws. And you end up giving something that they can do with their lives. In one of the conversations I had with some of the young people, they were very proud to me. These young people who are members of Mungiki and formed themselves into a savings cooperative, they had managed to buy 7 lorries, and this was a group of 17 young people. And they were telling me that we would never have imagined that we could become employers in our lives. Now we employ people. Now we go to the banks and secure a loan. We are paying taxes on the loan. So we feel now that we are actually operating within the rule of law. We are actually citizens who are making a positive contribution. So those kind of success stories are the ones that in our center we try to pick up and then go to the policymakers and tell them that here is something that we found is working. So you can use it to intervene in other areas. And this is quite important because in Kenya at the moment we have a proliferation of gangs in most of the towns and including in the rural areas. Officially, some of the studies show that we have over 100 known organized criminal gangs. The government has proscribed or banned about 47 of them, but there are many more and that are coming up because of the context that create or generate this kind of groups. So what we are doing is try to find out what is working, particularly with this group, and go to other places and tell them, go to the authorities in other places where they have the same problem and tell them, we found this is working here. You could possibly think of doing a similar thing or responding in a similar way without necessarily killing or imprisoning the young people. So that's the story of Mungiki in Kenya. Thank you.